Salofalava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susana Swiswiki. Coming up,
the sources from within the People's Alliance who have given me this information are well placed.
new allegations of who may have gifted Fiji Prime Minister's Rolex watch. Also, media outlets are scrambling following US funding cuts, and
they've reverted back to guidelines in 2007 and undergoing a refresh.
Pasifika scholars are calling out New Zealand's Ministry of Education. New allegations have emerged that the Fijian Prime Minister received a gold Rolex watch valued at 113,000 New Zealand dollars from disgraced backbencher Linda Tambuya. A veteran journalist and blogger claims that one of the country's deputy prime ministers is spreading the rumour to discredit Sitiveni Rambuka. The Prime Minister has refused to answer allegations about the watch's origins, saying he has the right to remain silent. Margot Staunton has more.
Deputy Prime Minister Manoa Kamikamica has denied spreading the rumour. It came from the editor of the notorious Grub Sheet blog, Graham Davis, who was press secretary to the former Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama. Mr Kamikamica said the suggestion was ludicrous.
That is absolute nonsense. I know the source of that rumour. It's certain former Australian journalist that had very highly paid position with the former government and is now casting aspersions on everybody from afar.
He added that he had no idea where the watch came from. Mr Davis said his sources are impeccable.
The sources from within the People's Alliance who have given me this information are well placed, and there are also links to the Rambuka family who say that Rambuka's grandchildren have said that the grandpa's watch came from Linda.
When told that Mr Davis was a multiple award-winning reporter, Mr Kamikamica said,
He may well win awards in Australia, but certainly the calibre of stuff he's putting around here in Fiji is pretty pathetic in my opinion.
Mr Davis hit back.
I'm so discredited that I've won all of the major prizes for journalists in Australia. I shall rest on my 50-year reputation for getting it right.
He added,
I feel quite justified in floating the suggestion with a view to him demonstrating that it's wrong, not launching a personal attack on me.
Mr Kamikamica said spreading rumours was not his style.
I have nothing but total respect for Honourable Tambuya and her husband. We are political colleagues and we stood shoulder to shoulder to get rid of the previous regime.
Ms Tambuya, the former Minister for Women, Children and Social Protection, was dumped from Cabinet after she appeared in a private video dancing naked on Christmas Eve. The Prime Minister decided not to expel her from the party last month in the spirit of second chances. Asked if he knew why the Prime Minister remained silent about the gold bling, the Deputy Prime Minister said,
Sometimes people do not wish to engage because they think that it's totally not relevant. So, like I said, you're certainly not going to get any answers from me.
Meanwhile, one of Ms Tambuya's allies, Fiji Women's Crisis Centre Coordinator Shamima Ali, said Ms Tambuya doesn't need to buy off the Prime Minister. She says the MP already had a lot of influence in the ruling party. The government's Director for Information, Samisoni Peretti, said Mr Rambuka didn't need to answer false allegations.
The media world is scrambling in the wake of the United States government's decision to cut funding to its affiliated broadcasters around the world. This includes organisations such as Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, and of particular concern in the Pacific, Bena News. Well-known Australian journalist Jenny Stein holds a senior position at RFA and explained to Don Wiseman what her organisation is trying to do to counter the impact of their federal grant being withdrawn.
I'm the managing editor for Radio Free Asia, and basically what we found out on Saturday morning was that our grant had been cancelled, and that in effect means the regular payments of money that keep us going as a grantee simply weren't paid. So drastic action has been taken by RFA. It's been forced to see whether it can, continue to operate on a skeleton basis for now while we try to determine what is our situation with our funding. So in the past, the Congress gives money to the United States Agency for Global Media, our parent organisation, and then those funds are handed on. But the decree on the weekend was that was no longer going to be funded. So, we're left trying to work out how to exist. So as a result of that, tough decisions have been made to furlough staff and to cut the contracts of all our contractors in country and elsewhere with RFA.
How many people are we talking about being furloughed?
Well, RFA in DC, there's about 300 people. I'm not sure of the exact numbers. I mean, we were told today, and I know I saw people leaving, but it seemed to be a massive amount of people who will be leaving the building end of Friday.
And overseas?
Well, all our contractors have been told that their services are no longer required.
Okay, and no redundancy pay or anything like that?
Well, no, because what the position is, I mean, there's a whole bunch of legal reasons around these things, but the case with furlough, I think senior management would very much like the option if funds come back in that we can bring people back to work.
What are the other funding options outside of government? Any?
Well, there are. I mean, I know lots of discussions are ongoing at the moment. Whether, we used to have bipartisan support. It seemed that until very recently, both the Democrats and the Republicans have supported RFA throughout its entire history. So, lobbying efforts are underway, legal challenges are being considered, and attempts to approach foundations and organisations for funding are underway. So that's part of the reason why these drastic measures have been taken to see if we can stay afloat.
What have you been told in terms of why you should go by the federal government?
Look, we've read the reports. I don't know if there's been any direct communication other than what's been in the media.
There are subsidiaries associated with RFA.
They're not subsidiaries of us. We are one entity, a grantee under the USAGM. So that's what makes us different to VOA, which is government employees. We exist solely because on the basis of a grant from Congress.
A deep-sea mining company leading the charge for the budding future industry is being accused by environmental groups of changing its corporate branding from fueling the green transition to supporting security and defence. But the metals company says this is not true, and just another attempt to try and stop the industry before it can even start. Caleb Fotheringham has more.
Environmental groups claim the metals company is moving away from its original sales pitch that critical metals are essential for the green transition to one geared towards security and defence. A press release in December from the metals company says it applauds the US defence feasibility study on deep-sea nodule refining. Corey McLaughlin, head of stakeholder relations at the metals company, says the accusation suits the narrative of those opposed to deep-sea mining.
They accused us previously when we said that they could be used, they were ideally suited for electric vehicles, that was greenwashing. Now the suggestion is that because you have the defense industry and other ministries within government that are interested in this for their strategic importance, that therefore they're going to be used for defense and armaments, and therefore it's bad.
Phil McGabe from the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition is critical about the apparent shift.
The true character, true nature's coming out. They've moved away from deep sea mining for the green transition and moved it towards critical minerals for security and defence.
Mr McLaughlin says the company is not in production yet, and just because defence is interested in the minerals, it doesn't mean that's where they will go.
There is growing interest in these metals from a diverse source of potential customers and actors, and it is not limited to any one outcome. These metals will be treated like most other commodities. They will move into the market and they will be used where they are most in demand.
The company has recently dropped a contract with a Kiribati state-owned enterprise and now only has 2 contracts in the high seas. Kiribati's Ministry of Fisheries and Ocean Resources is now courting China to take the metal company's place. Mr McGabe says it's a sign of a flailing company, which is now putting pressure on the International Seabed Authority, or ISA, to get the green light to mine.
The pressure is coming from the metals company, and the metals company is financially on its knees. It really needs something to move quickly. They're getting desperate.
Corey McLaughlin says the company is not in financial hardship and they pulled out of the contract because it wasn't commercially viable.
As a commercial entity, it's our job to allocate resources efficiently and effectively. And so we've determined that the best way for us to use our resources is to advance our other two projects, which are extremely competitive when you consider their commercial viability. So that makes a lot of sense.
Deep-sea mining hasn't started yet, and there are no rules to do so in international waters. Despite this, the metals company is planning to submit an application to mine in June by using a legal loophole. The company, along with several others, have also asked the ISA in a letter to get a move on with adopting mining rules, saying they have poured billions into exploring potential sites and have the expectation of extracting the valuable minerals. Part of the letter has been voiced.
We contractors have collectively invested approximately $2 billion in the exploration of deep-sea mineral resources, the acquisition of environmental and biodiversity baseline data, and the development of mining and processing technology.
The 30th session of the International Seabed Authority is currently meeting in Kingston, Jamaica to discuss deep-sea mining rules and regulations. It's under new leadership, and environmental groups hope the new Secretary-General will prioritise the health of the seabed over industry concerns.
Pasifika scholars in New Zealand say the scrapping of the 2020 Relationship and Sex Education Guidelines is a backward step, hindering youth from safely navigating adolescence. The scholars are urging the country's Ministry of Education to reinstate the guidelines, which are rooted in Pacific values of collective care, respect and cultural identity. The ministry have reverted to the 2007 guidelines, which are seen as outdated. I spoke with the University of Auckland Research Fellow, Dr. Analosa Veokiso Ulungia, and began by asking her what was being removed.
So the 2020 Relationships and Sexuality Education Guidelines that were a form of resource for our schools, Board of Trustees, teachers, young people. As part of the coalition agreement, Winston Peters called them woke and trying to introduce some kind of gender ideology. And so on that basis, he pushed for the removal of these guidelines.
And why do you see that as a concern?
It's absolutely appalling. What they've done is, when I say they, the Ministry of Education, they've reverted back to guidelines in 2007 and undergoing a refresh, which won't be available of the curriculum until next year. And what that means is that, 15 years of advancements, advocacy for our Pacific knowledge, values, diversities to be included in the curriculum and where our Pacific children can see themselves reflected, that's out the window.
Could you give me an example of the difference between the 2007 guideline versus in comparison to the 2020 guidelines?
Okay, yeah. I can tell you that in the 2020 guidelines, we made explicit acknowledgement. So, if you're going to talk about relationships and sexuality with our children, with our communities, you need to be aware of the cultural differences. And an example of that is, what was in there said, hey, look, if you're going to have these conversations, you may actually really want to consider having a males group to discuss, as a group amongst themselves, and our female students to have these conversations. And we had teachers in the South Island that read this and were actually like, hey, why should we be doing this? They couldn't understand until it was explained to them. Actually, this is about respecting, the relationships between, for example, you might have a cousin in your class, a male cousin, and saying, hey, look, this is about respecting you, respecting me, but also respecting our teachers.
And, have you been able to get a response from Pasifika families or students, and do their responses validate the concerns that you've raised?
In my own conversations and discussions, and what's come through. So, for example, the Education Review Office completed a review of the guidelines last year, and actually there was overwhelming support from students for these guides. We know in the conversations I've had with parents that actually when you first hear even the title itself, and if it's got those 3 letters, if it has sex, the first kind of train of thought is, actually, are you teaching my child how to have sex? Where actually what's more important is actually having a conversation and saying, look, this is actually about respect. This is about relationships. This is about how you your child might understand themselves and another person and how they relate within their families. And so that question about how is it received by parents, it's across the board, but that also acknowledges where our parents may be at with this topic.
Do you think, though, it's the responsibility of Pacific parents to be teaching their children respect and having those conversations about sex?
Of course, I think, parents in home, that's our first school, in terms of where, and as a parent myself, I am trying to impart, these values of respecting themselves, respecting others. And of course, I need the schools, and the schools are wanting us as parents to come on board. We're all on the same page here with what we want for our children.
And what about the Minister of Education? Have you been able to speak to her about these guidelines?
From what I have heard, the Minister has actually, this is an operational matter for the Ministry of Education. And so we are still, we as Pacific scholars are still advocating,
And what's next from here, Analosa?
Well, the ministry are putting together a refresh of the curriculum, of the health and physical education curriculum, and that's not slated to come out until next year. And so I just really want to encourage, our families, our parents, to please, get in contact with your school, get in contact with your local MP, or even sign, there are petitions out there that are saying, look, please involve us in these conversations that affect our children and their education and their well-being.
Hey, thank you so much for your time, Ananosa. That's the end of our talanoa, but is there anything else that you'd like to share?
I think, it's that reminder that if we as a community, as parents, aren't actually speaking up and speaking out, there is we're putting our children's futures and health and well-being at risk. Our children deserve an education that prepares them, so that they can make safe, informed choices while they're still connected to our amazing culture and identities.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā soifua.